Hey guys, tonight we follow the barefoot shuffle of a man who questioned absolutely everything, except maybe his choice to never wear sandals. You're in ancient Athens now, where the sky is stone blue and the streets are a mixture of dust, donkey droppings, and democracy in action. Somewhere between a clay jug vendor and a sausage seller shouting his daily deals, there's a man standing still. He's short, paunchy, shirt half untucked, beard scraggly, nose doing its best impersonation of a potato, and he's deep in conversation with everyone. You trail behind him as he moves from stall to stall, bothering passers-by in the name of wisdom. He's asking things like, what is justice? And what makes a good person? And, more perplexingly, is virtue like cheese, something you can slice and share? The fish vendor doesn't know what to say. The cobbler offers him a discount just to make him leave. This is Socrates. He doesn't write. He doesn't charge for lectures. He doesn't even teach in the formal sense. What he does is talk. A lot. To anyone who will listen and plenty who wish they weren't. And you're tagging along, sandals collecting the Athenian grime he's long since stopped noticing. You wonder how this man, with no title or temple, became a kind of philosophical meteor, less a teacher than a slow, smirking detonation. The Agorathons, beating hearts where he thrives. It's not just a market. It's an arena for thoughts, rumors, ideas that hatch under the hot sun and flap off in every direction. Socrates slides into conversations like a pebble into a boot, persistent, oddly uncomfortable, and not easily removed. You listen in as he interrupts a rich merchant. What is wealth? A large house, fine clothes. No, I mean, what is it? I just told you, but you gave me examples, not a definition. Can you define it? Can you go away? He doesn't. He rarely does. He doesn't claim to know the answers, only that others probably don't either. And, somehow, that's both irritating and disarming. He's dismantling certainty brick by brick, all while asking for no coin and offering no conclusions. Mainstream historians agree. Socrates was born around 470 BCE and served in the Athenian military. He fought bravely, some say, the Peloponnesian War. That's right. Your barefoot philosopher once wore armor and dodged spears. That's a harder image to process than his stance on virtue, and yet he never seems more alive than in these aimless walks, speaking with slaves and senators alike, treating all humans as equally confused and equally worthy of questioning. There's a strange kind of democracy in that. Also, a strange kind of body odor. You lean into one moment a potter, sweaty and defensive, being grilled about what makes a good bowl. Is it usefulness? Socrates asks. Well, yes. And what of beauty? Sure, that too. And if a bowl is beautiful but leaks, then it's art. Socrates just laughs now. Let's drop a fringe detail in your lap. Some lesser-known scholars argue Socrates may have intentionally dressed down and gone barefoot as a kind of anti-fashion, a political protest against materialism and the emerging wealth obsession of post-war Athens. The beard, the lack of hygiene, it wasn't laziness. It was performance. Performance art for hundreds BCE edition, of course. Not everyone bought into his whole humble wiseman shtick. Plenty of Athenians just thought he was a weirdo with a smug expression and too much time on his hands. And then there's the idea that Socrates never really existed as we picture him. Historians still argue whether the real Socrates matched the version we know from Plato's writings, or whether Plato used him as a kind of sock puppet to spout his own more cosmic ideas. Still, As you shuffle behind him, eyes squinting in the noon glare, goats bleating in the distance, you can't help but feel the strange gravity of this man. He doesn't command crowds, he drains them. Like some philosophical sinkhole, he pulls people into these circular, exhausting, exhilarating talks, and they leave unsure if they've been enlightened, or just mentally mugged. The sun is dipping slightly. Socrates pauses at a fountain, cupping water in his calloused hands. You know, he says to a silent onlooker, no man ever steps in the same river twice. Did you come up with that? The man asks. No, Socrates says, but I stole it with style. That's another thing, he doesn't claim originality. He references Heraclitus, Anaximander, even the poets, but he cuts through their verses with streetwise skepticism. He wants to pull ideas from the air and wring them through logic, not to dry, then at least to air them out. You sit beside him now, the stones still warm beneath you. He asks your name, then your opinion on courage. Then why you think that, then why you really think that. You feel your beliefs wobble like a table missing a leg, and just when your brain is too tired to argue, he says softly, good, now we're getting somewhere, somewhere. You look around, eschewing doce agora, still surrounded by merchants and goats and gossip, but you realize you're somewhere else entirely now, somewhere inside a question you didn't know you needed to ask. Asterisk. Barely had time to recover from that last ambush of self-doubt when Socrates starts walking again, his pace meandering but sure. His gait, if you can call it that, is more like a slow wobble, like someone thinking with their feet. He nods at a group of boys playing knucklebones, sidesteps a startled chicken, and nearly bumps into a statue base. It's clear the man isn't looking where he's going. He's looking inward, constantly, but outwardly. Let's just say the gods didn't spend a lot of time on the aesthetics. You stare at him now, not out of rudeness, but because honestly, his face looks like a carved turnip that's been kicked down a hill. He's balding, yes, with a thick beard that bristles out in half-hearted rebellion. His eyes bulge slightly. His nose seems to have ideas of its own, and his robe is generously interpreted. He wears the same one every day, and by the smell of it, he's very committed to the bit. This is not a man who wakes up early to do his skincare routine. And yet, here he is, hailed as the wisest in Athens, looking like someone who might be denied entry to his own philosophy. Class on hygiene grounds. You walk behind him and try to hold your breath. The strangest part, he doesn't seem to care at all. In fact, he seems to relish his aesthetic rebellion. There's a kind of freedom in not caring what people think, deep freedom. Socrates doesn't dress to impress. He dresses, if anything, to express detachment. His dirt-smudged robe, bare feet, and uncombed beard aren't laziness. They're statements, mainstream fact. Even ancient writers like Xenophon and Aristophanes couldn't help but comment on his appearance. Aristophanes, in particular, painted him in the clouds as a floating, pompous nitwit with a basket strapped to his head basically. The prototype for that one professor who insists that grades don't matter while assigning 40-page essays. You follow him now into a shaded alley off the main market. He's having a fresh debate with a teenage boy about moderation. The boy argues that moderation is just the absence of excess. Socrates responds by asking, so if I eat 1 cake a day, is that moderation? Well, maybe. And if I eat 2 cakes a day, that's probably too much. But what if I'm really hungry? Sir, do you even like cake? This, by the way, is a good metaphor for how talking with Socrates always feels. Like you're being mugged with questions about dessert. Here's a quirky detail. Socrates was notorious for his stamina, not just in debates, but at parties. He could drink everyone under the table. Plato describes him at symposia fancy Greek dinner parties as calm and sober while others slurred and snoozed. He'd stay up all night talking, thinking, sometimes. Literally standing in place in deep concentration until the next sunrise. Yes, standing still all night. The man was part philosopher, part human statue, and scholars still argue whether this behavior was the mark of spiritual discipline or just eccentric stubbornness. Was he a mystic locked in contemplation or just a guy with an insanely weird sleep schedule and a tolerance for wine that would humble most rugby teams? Now, let's consider how others reacted to this so-called wisdom wrapped in a pile of dirty laundry. Reactions were mixed. Some admired him, saw him as a living rebuke to shallow values, a walking no to vanity, wealth, and the ego traps of city life. Others, they just saw a troublemaker, an eyesore, a living contradiction who claimed to know nothing while acting like he had the last word in every conversation. You sit next to him now, watching as a potter walks away mid-debate, muttering something about mad old men and their riddles. Socrates seems unfazed. He closes his eyes for a second, then turns to you. What do you think wisdom is? You freeze. I am maybe knowing a lot of stuff. He chuckles. Then a librarian is wiser than a philosopher. You blink. Well, librarians are pretty wise. He waits. You flounder, and suddenly you realize he isn't laughing at you. He's inviting you into the murky pond of thought where definitions don't hold and words bend like reeds in the wind, and where you might find something interesting in the murk. Even his most vicious critics admitted he had that effect, that maddening charm, that way of pushing past pride and pretense into something more elemental. It's why students like Plato followed him, why his enemies feared him, and why his friends often had headaches as you both rest beneath a fig tree. Socrates plucks one and examines it like it's a moral dilemma. Sweetness, he says, biting into it, can also rot your teeth. You nod. That's probably not even metaphorical. It's just ... a fruit fact. Or is it? Noon again, and the sun is baking the white stones of Athens into something between an oven and a metaphor. Socrates is back at it, his bare feet slapping against the ground, his robes even more wrinkled than usual, his gaze drifting lazily across the crowd like he's searching for his next victim. You trail him past the marketplace and into a small plaza where a few young men are lounging like cats, too rich to work and too bored not to talk. Socrates approaches them with the confidence of a man who has nothing to lose and no particular plans for the day. You can already sense it coming. The barrage. He drops into their conversation without warning. So, you think courage is doing brave things? Yes. One young man, slim, confident, dressed like a statue that just walked out of a museum. Of course, everyone knows that. Socrates smiles, but not kindly. Everyone? So if someone rushes into battle blindly, is that courage? I guess not. Then courage isn't just doing brave things. Maybe it's doing the right brave things. And what's the right kind? The young man shifts uncomfortably. This is how it always starts. Socrates never lectures, never declares. He attacks by asking, not with fists, but with questions that loop and double back and gradually, maddeningly, expose the hollow places in your logic. Some call it the elenchus, the Socratic method. Others just call it the reason they avoid walking through the plaza. When he's around, he's not trying to win. That would imply a conclusion. What he wants is friction, sparks, a place where truth might accidentally catch fire. Mainstream historians still cite this method as one of Socrates' greatest contributions to Western thought. It's not about feeding you answers, it's about starving you of certainty. Until you admit you're hungry for better thinking, you sit on a bench now, watching Socrates and the Lounge Boys like it's the ancient version of a reality show. Athens' next top philosopher. Spoiler, no one wins. Now here's the quirky twist. Socrates claimed he wasn't a teacher. Not officially. He said he was more like a midwife, helping others give birth to their own ideas. That's right. The man literally compared himself to a philosophical doula. He called his technique maiutics, which is either deeply wise or deeply weird, depending on your tolerance for analogies involving childbirth and ethics. But there's something undeniably human about the process. He doesn't belittle, he doesn't shout, he doesn't throw scrolls. He just keeps asking until people unravel them sometimes. Rebuild. You overhear another exchange now, this time with a grizzled ex-soldier, Socrates. Is justice the same as obeying the law? Soldier, sure. Socrates, but what if the law is unjust? Soldier, then it's not a good law. Socrates, so justice isn't law. Soldier, it should be Socrates, but it isn't always. Soldier, I hate this. And yet there's a respect. People walk away rubbing their temples, muttering, but also thinking in a new register. Historians still argue whether Socrates was truly a democrat at heart, or just enjoyed the aesthetic of equality. He never aligned fully with the sophists, the wandering teachers who charged fees for wisdom, wore perfume, and seemed very into their hair. Socrates mocked them constantly, especially for pretending to know things they didn't, and unlike them, he didn't charge a single drachma for his debates. He also didn't bathe, which, depending on your standard, might or might not count as a moral high ground. You drift closer as another boy jumps into the discussion. What do you say virtue is, old man? Socrates leans forward, eyes twinkling. A question I've asked for 30 years. Tell me, what do you say? I say it's doing what's good. And what's good? Following the gods. And which gods? The boy falters. You can almost hear his confidence leaking out like a poorly sealed wineskin. The thing is, Socrates never says you're wrong. He just lets your reasoning collapse in your own hands. You start with pride and end up barefoot beside him, wondering if anything means anything at all. But weirdly, it feels okay. You're starting to understand why some students followed him for years. He made you feel like every idea mattered even when it didn't survive the hour. There was no textbook, no classroom, no certainty, just this slow, barefoot dismantling of what you thought you knew. He pauses now, turning toward you. You've been quiet, he says. What's your name? You tell him. And what makes a person wise? You blink. You try to recall all his tricks, all the traps he's laid for others, but still, your tongue trips. He waits, calm, open, not smug, just curious. You murmur, maybe, someone who keeps asking questions. He smiles, and for the first time, it feels genuine, like a sunset slowly spreading across a tired sky. Then you are well on your way, and just like that, he turns to argue with a fruit seller about whether apples can be just or merely tasty. It's evening now. The warm orange glow of the sun pools across the rooftops of Athens like spilled wine, thick golden, a little too quiet. You and Socrates sit at the edge of the agora, where the market's noise fades and the columns cast long shadows. You're sweating, mentally and physically, not because you've been walking too far, but because you've just spent the last 2 hours listening to him debate whether someone can be moral if they act kindly by accident. Someone dropped a coin in a beggar's bowl without looking. Socrates saw it, and from that moment on, your day was over. But now, in this softer hour, he begins to tell a story, not with flair, no epic tone, no arm-sweeping grandeur, just flatly, plainly, he says, I once heard a voice, not words, just a sound, a divine sign. You stop fidgeting. He's referring to something that scholars still bicker about, the daemonion, a kind of inner voice or spiritual warning system that Socrates claimed would speak to him. It didn't tell him what to do. It only stopped him from doing certain things, like a gut feeling with a better vocabulary. He never called it a god. He never claimed it came from Olympus, just that it was always there, whispering no when he veered off his strange, invisible path. Historians still argue whether this was literal, a belief in a personal, divine guardian, or metaphorical. Maybe it was his conscience, dressed up in the language of myth. Maybe it was a clever way to dodge responsibility. Oh, sorry, I would have helped with your roof repairs. But the divine voice said no. You smile at the idea. Socrates, the philosopher who ghosted his chores by invoking a holy veto. He sees you grin. You think that's funny, a little. He leans back. Good. I do too. I don't trust a man who doesn't laugh at himself. You wonder then, was that the real voice? The one telling him to stop pretending, stop following, stop obeying when he didn't believe. This same daemonian, he says, once stopped him from entering politics. A career he would have easily secured. He was popular enough among the youth, known enough among the older elite. But every time the opportunity rose, the voice said, no. Socrates obeyed. Mainstream fact, he served in the military, was known to be brave in battle, and even held public office briefly. But politics, that world of favors and self-preservation, he kept his distance. Because maybe, just maybe, philosophy and power aren't meant to mix. Now, for a lovely fringe detail. Some sources say Socrates used to stop mid-stride sometimes. In the middle of the street and just freeze. He would stand still for hours, lost in some internal puzzle. Once, during a military campaign, he stood still in the snow all night, deep in thought, unfazed by cold or time. In the morning, his fellow soldiers found him exactly where he'd been the evening before, staring ahead, barefoot, frost on his beard. Whether this is truth or legend doesn't matter. The image has lodged itself in history like a forgotten pebble inside a sandal. You lean back beside him now, watching as he squints at the dying sun. He tells you that the unexamined life isn't worth living. You've heard the phrase before, probably on a dorm wall or a mug sold to first-year philosophy majors. But now, as he says it, there's weight to it, because he means it. He's lived it. He's sacrificed comfort, wealth, status things. Others chase their whole lives for this strange, lonely freedom. He's been poor all his life. His meals are simple. His clothes don't change. His feet are calloused from decades of barefoot wandering. And still, he asks questions. You try to imagine doing this forever, never settling, never pausing, never claiming, I know. The idea both humbles you and makes you very tired. You ask, Don't you ever want to rest? Socrates raises an eyebrow. Rest from what? From the questions, from all the not knowing. He chuckles, soft and dry. But not knowing is the best part. That's where all the light comes through. You don't quite know what he means, but it sounds like something worth scribbling on a napkin and quoting years later. Night settles over. Athens like a blanket you didn't realize you needed. The agora is emptying, voices drifting away like old songs. You're not sure what you've learned today, only that the things you thought you knew feel less certain and more alive. Socrates stands slowly, brushing dust from his robe. You follow. I'm hungry, he says, but I don't know if that means I should eat. You stare at him, or perhaps, he adds, it means I should consider what hunger really is. You groan, but it's a fond, sleepy groan, like the sigh you make before turning off a light. He smiles at your exasperation. Come, he says, let's go ask the baker what he thinks about virtue. Of course, that's dinner with Socrates. The sky above Athens is darker, now punctured by stars and gently buzzing with cicadas. You walk beside Socrates through narrow back streets lit by flickering oil lamps. Somewhere, someone is playing a flute. Somewhere else, an argument over wine taxes rises into the air like smoke. The city doesn't sleep so much as it shifts into another rhythm. Socrates, naturally, keeps talking. He's in the middle of another one of his favorite loops. What is goodness? Not in theory, but in the dirt, in the breath, in the small, almost invisible moments that make up a life. You see, he says, as if it's obvious, if you want to be good, you must first know what good is. And if you don't know, then you can't be good by accident. That's just luck, not virtue. You try to answer, but you're too sleepy to play Socratic dodgeball again. Your brain is oatmeal. He seems to sense this. You're tired, he says, a little. Well, he shrugs. No good answer ever came to a man while he was fresh. That actually feels true as you duck into a small shop near the edge of the agora. Baker's stall, lit by a hanging lantern. You realize he's still trying to prove something, but not to you, to himself. He orders nothing, just leans on the counter and starts questioning the baker about justice in business transactions. Is it more just to give fair weight, he asks, or to give more than what's fair? The baker, a stout man with flour in his beard, replies, depends if the customer's watching. That sends Socrates into another delighted spiral. Mainstream fact, time. Socrates never wrote anything down. Not a word. Everything we know about his thought comes from others, chiefly Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes. Each one saw a different man. Plato painted him as the spiritual father of Western philosophy. Xenophon portrayed him as a practical moralist. Aristophanes, well, he turned Socrates into a pareidoia, floating cloud chaser who corrupted the youth and ignored the gods. This leads to a fringe and fascinating possibility. What if Socrates himself was a fiction, not entirely of course but exaggerated, warped, a convenient canvas for others to paint their ideas on? Some scholars still argue whether Socrates, as we know him, is more Plato than man. But then standing here beside this quietly mischievous, endlessly questioning old soul, you feel pretty certain he was real. Too strangely specific to be fake. Like that one uncle who only ever shows up to weddings barefoot and carrying olives. The baker, now somewhat flustered, hands you a half loaf as a peace offering. Socrates accepts it and thanks him with a soft nod. like he's collected another clue to the universe and can now move on. As you walk again, bread still warm in your hands, Socrates begins to speak, not of philosophy, but of death. I do not fear it, he says simply. For one of two things is true: it is either a dreamless sleep or a relocation of the soul. You pause. Which do you believe? I do not know, he says, sounding almost content with the uncertainty. But neither frightens me. You chew on that mentally, not just the bread. The idea that not knowing something so massive, so final, could bring peace rather than panic. Socrates doesn't believe in cluttering the mind with what can't be proven. He laughs at people who fear Hades but sleep peacefully every night without question. Tell me, he says, do you remember your sleep last week? Did you suffer in it? No, you answer. Then perhaps death is not so cruel. He doesn't mean to be morbid. This isn't gloom. It's clarity. An understanding that to live wisely, you must make peace with the idea that your answers might never come at least not while you're breathing. And yet, he did have beliefs. About the soul, about its immortality, about some kind of cosmic order. He just didn't insist on them the way others did. His faith was porous, not rigid. You walk in silence now. Athens rising around you in layer stone, sky, shadow, memory. Socrates hums something that might be a tune, or might be the philosophical equivalent of a burp. Hard to tell. He stops beside a public fountain, cups water into his hands, and drinks, then offers some to you. You do the same. It's warm, slightly metallic, but deeply satisfying. Maybe it's the company. You think about how different this night would have been with someone lecturing you, reciting doctrine, waving a scroll. But Socrates, he gives you questions and space. You remember earlier that divine voice of his, that little whisper of no dot. And suddenly, as you lean against a pillar and let the bread's crust crack between your teeth, you wonder if the voice was never divine at all. Maybe it was his way of holding still, of stepping back when the world pushed too fast. You glance over. He's already begun another conversation, this time with a girl refilling water jugs. He's asking her what makes something beautiful. She laughs, thinking it's a pickup line. But then he starts passing definitions of symmetry, of proportion, of harmony. And she slowly realizes she's wandered into the deep end of the philosophical pool. You just smile and watch the stars. That's the thing about Socrates. He doesn't need temples. He doesn't need titles. He doesn't even need shoes. All he needs is another mind, another hour, another quiet place to ask something impossible. And you need sleep, but not yet. Not while the questions still flicker in the dark like tiny, insistent lanterns. Now, the streets are mostly empty. The stones beneath your sandals still radiate the warmth of the sun long gone, and the air smells faintly of olives, burnt oil, and something sweet drifting in from the hills. Socrates is still walking, but slower now, not tired, just thoughtful, like a cat choosing which patch of moonlight to curl up in. He turns to you suddenly and says, "Tell me what you know about yourself." You freeze, mid-bite of leftover bread. What do you mean? He gestures lazily. Who are you? What makes you? You. You start to answer your name, your family, maybe your job, but he waves it away with a grin. That's what you do. I asked what you are. Ah, it's going to be one of those conversations again. Socrates is gently steering you into the realm of self-knowledge, his favorite labyrinth. Not the puffed-up believe-in-yourself version you find on motivational posters, but the hard, elbow-greasy kind that makes you question every story you've ever told about yourself. This was his obsession. Know thyself, carved into the temple of Apollo at Delphi, was practically his alarm clock. He didn't just ask questions for fun, though. He certainly enjoyed the chaos. He believed that knowing yourself was the foundation for wisdom, virtue, and even happiness. Mainstream fact. This was what made Socrates different from earlier philosophers. The pre-Socratics loved big picture, stuff, fire, water, the cosmos, the underlying stuff of reality. Socrates brought the lens inward. He wanted to understand human nature, ethics, how to live a good life. No lightning bolts or golden chariots, just whether or not you could go to sleep at night, feeling like you hadn't lied to yourself. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Socrates was rumored to have a weird charm that no one could quite explain. Even people who hated him said they couldn't stop listening. Alcibiades, the famously beautiful general and Socrates' former student, once compared talking to him to being bitten by a snake, pleasurable and painful at once. He is the only man who has ever made me feel shame, Alcibiades said. That's one heck of a Yelp review. You sit now at the edge of a dry fountain, the kind that probably worked better in myth than in plumbing reality. Socrates crouches next to you, eyes squinting with amusement. Most people, he says, collect themselves like coins, names, places, trophies, memories, and call that a self. But none of those things are you. You nod slowly, trying not to sigh. It's late. Your brain is creaking like a boat in shallow water. But still, you follow the thread. What if I'm just a process? You say. His eyes sparkle. Yes, that's closer. But a process of what? You're not sure. Thought, change, becoming. A sort of soup of memories and impulses stirred by time. You suddenly feel very floaty. Maybe it's the moonlight. Or maybe it's philosophical vertigo. Historians still argue whether Socrates himself ever reached conclusions. He wasn't known for clear answers. In fact, some say he used ignorance as a weapon, one he sharpened with questions until his opponents tripped over their own assumptions. The Socratic method, as it came to be known, isn't about solving, it's about dissolving. Peeling away certainty until you hit something soft, wobbly, and maybe true. You look at him, so, what if I don't really know myself? He pats your shoulder. Then you're in excellent company. He leans back, resting against the worn marble lip of the fountain. The night air presses down softly, like a hand brushing your forehead. You feel lighter in a strange way. Like a weight you didn't know you were carrying has shifted. Self-knowledge, he tells you, isn't a destination. It's a practice. A lifetime hobby, like bad poetry or pretending you'll fix that broken chair someday. And sometimes it's painful, really painful. Because when you start peeling back the layers, you might find things you don't like. Pettiness, fear, contradictions, weird crushes on fictional characters. But he insists that's part of the beauty, because if you can face those shadows without flinching, you've already started to grow. You glance up. The moon is high now, bathing everything in a pale glow that makes even the chipped statues look noble. Socrates is humming again, or maybe just exhaling rhythmically. You can't tell any more, and then he says something that sticks. To know yourself is not to explain yourself. It is to sit quietly with what you find and not run away. You lie back, staring at the stars. They don't offer any answers either, but you don't mind tonight. The questions feel .. enough. Socrates stretches beside you, his tunic rustling like paper. You're improving, he murmurs. At what? At being uncomfortable. Well, that's something. The city is asleep now. Even the arguments have gone quiet. You don't know who you are, not really, but you feel more like yourself than you did this morning. Maybe that's the trick, not to define yourself, just to keep asking, keep noticing, keep showing up in your own skin. You roll over, using your arm as a pillow, and whisper, mostly to yourself, "Who am I?" And from somewhere beside you, Socrates grunts approvingly. Dawn doesn't arrive with trumpets in Athens. It sneaks in, brushing gently over terracotta roofs and curling around the Acropolis like a sleepy cat. Light paints the city in pale honey, and Socrates is already up. Of course he is. Probably. Hasn't slept, possibly never does. Maybe sleep, like writing things down, is another thing he politely refuses to participate in. You groan and sit up. Your back creaks like a wooden bench. Socrates offers you a fig with a smirk. You dream. Anything wise? He asks. Only of falling off the edge of the world. He says. You're getting there. Today he wants to talk about politics. Not policies, not parties, not which general insulted which envoy at which banquet. No, Socrates wants to ask, what makes someone fit to lead? You should have guessed. It's one of his favorite mental mazes. He loves using it to catch smug young men who think they're ready to run the city because they inherited a robe and a house with a view. Tell me, he says, walking with you toward the agora as stalls creak open and sleepy vendors yawn into their olives. Would you let someone who's never steered a ship captain your boat through a storm? You shake your head. Would you let someone who's never studied medicine cut you open with a knife? Definitely not. Then why, he says, spreading his arms dramatically, do we let anyone rule just because they're popular? Boom, there it is. Socrates doesn't believe in democracy not the way Athens does. He thinks politics should be run by people who know what they're doing, not just people who win the most claps. Imagine replacing your doctor with the most charismatic guy from your gym. That's how Socrates sees public elections. Mainstream fact. Socrates was vocally skeptical of democracy, especially after seeing it fail spectacularly. Athens' decision to execute or exile key generals after the Battle of Arginusi, simply to satisfy public outrage, horrified him. It confirmed his fear that mass opinion could be as dangerous as any tyrant. And here's a quirky twist for you. Despite all this, Socrates did serve in the assembly once. He was part of the Prytaneis, the 500-citizen body chosen by lottery to oversee the government for a month, when the assembly tried to illegally sentence a group of generals without trial. Socrates alone stood up and refused to go along. Just one guy in sandals, calmly saying no to a crowd on fire. Historians still argue whether Socrates' stance was noble civic duty or elitist rejection of democratic values. Maybe it was both. Maybe he just didn't want to see important decisions made by whatever mob happened to be loudest that day. Back in the present, Socrates is still mid-rant, pacing in a tight circle in the agora, debating with nobody in particular. Should leadership be a birthright? A popularity contest? A lottery? No, it should be an art, a discipline, a craft, like sculpture you offer. He snaps his fingers. Exactly. We spend years training a man to chisel marble, and no time at all training a man to run a state. You sit beside a sleepy bronze statue and watch vendors set up their wares. A girl arranges figs in geometric rows. An old man sharpens a fish knife with the rhythm of someone who's done this every morning for 60 years. Socrates watches too, admiring the quiet competence around him. If you want a good state, he says, you need rulers who love truth, not gold, not applause, just ... truth. You remind him gently that people like that are rare. True, he says, and we often throw rocks at them when they show up. He smiles. Fortunately, truth doesn't bruise easily. You wonder if he's thinking about his own future, about the trial, the charges, the hemlock, but he says nothing about that yet. For now, he just critiques a marble column as if it personally offended him. You're not sure if he wants philosopher kings or just fewer idiots in charge. But it's clear he sees leadership as a moral responsibility, not a career, something sacred, almost. The sun climbs. You feel the heat settle on your shoulders, familiar and oddly comforting. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, someone is, already haggling too loudly about cheese, and Socrates, bless him's still unraveling his thoughts. He pauses beside a graffiti-scratched pillar and touches it lightly. The city is a body, he says, and every citizen is a cell. If the brain's sick, the limbs don't move right. If the heart is weak, the breath shortens. You nod, biting into your fig. So we need a philosopher for a brain. No, he says, we need a healthy brain. Philosophers just happen to ask more questions before jumping off cliffs. You both laugh. You're tired again, but it's a good kind of tired. Like you've spent the morning planting ideas that will take weeks to sprout. Socrates claps you on the back. Come, he says. Let's go find someone who thinks he knows what justice is. Of course you will. That's what mornings with Socrates are for. The sun is directly overhead now, blazing like some dramatic celestial overseer judging your hydration choices. You've ditched your outer cloak and found a patch of shade, though Socrates refuses to acknowledge that temperatures above 30 degrees even exist. He's pacing again, sandals slapping the dusty stones, sweat darkening the folds of his tunicant. He doesn't care. In fact, he seems thrilled. Why? Because someone mentioned the word justice. It was a passing comment. A merchant muttered something about getting a fair price, and boom, Socrates latched on like a particularly stubborn burr. He dragged you away from your lunch, a nice barley roll, now forgotten, and launched headlong into his favorite philosophical arena. What the gods is justice, anyway? You lean against a worn pillar as he barrels into it. Tell me, he starts, eyes sparkling, is justice simply giving each person what they deserve? Sounds fair, you say. Rookie mistake. What if a madman lent you a sword and later demands it back to hurt people? Then, maybe don't give it back, so you don't give everyone what they deserve. He grins. You give them what's right. Mainstream fact, this kind of argument appears in the Republic, where Plato's Socrates' most famous student records long conversations about justice, society, and the ideal state. Socrates tears apart simplistic ideas like justice is helping your friends and hurting your enemies, which was considered common sense back then. To Socrates, justice couldn't be reduced to tribal loyalty or fair trades. It had to be deeper. And now Socrates is dragging you into the murky swamp of that depth. He talks about harmony, balance, the soul as a city with parts reason, spirit, appetite, one needing to do its job and not try to be something it's not. Justice, in this model, is when everything in you functions in proportion, not when you win arguments, not when you punish criminals, but when your reason rules your emotions and desires, like a wise conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. It's a beautiful metaphor, also wildly impractical. You, like most people, sometimes eat 3 cookies for dinner and then try to justify it with moral relativism. Socrates smiles as if he knows this. Justice, he says, is not only out there in laws and courts. It's in how you live, how you decide, how you restrain yourself when no one's watching. You sigh. That sounds exhausting. He shrugs. Only at first. Then it becomes freedom. And here's a quirky little detail. According to legend, when Socrates was once asked whether people should fear injustice more than death, he replied that an unjust life was a kind of death. Not dramatic, sword through the gut, death, but something worse, a deadening of the soul, a spiritual atrophy, like mold growing in the corners of your conscience. Historians still argue whether this vision of justice was meant to guide individuals or serve as blueprints for actual governments. Plato certainly thought it could shape entire cities. Others believe Socrates was simply interested in what made people good, not states powerful. You sit down again, watching children run through the square, dodging between grown-ups and olive crates. One of them shouts about a stolen toy. That's mine, the child insists, tears forming. See, Socrates whispers, leaning close. Already we assume ownership equals justice. You blink. But the kid's probably right. Maybe, or maybe we're all just acting out scripts we've never questioned. You rest your chin on your knees. This conversation is making you feel like a very nervous puppet. Justice, it seems, is not what's legal. It's not revenge. It's not even fairness, strictly speaking. It's a kind of internal architecture, a way of aligning yourself so that you're not pulled apart by your own worst instincts. You think about that for a while. You think about your own impulses, the grudges you've justified, the shortcuts you've taken, the lies you've told to avoid small discomforts. Then Socrates hits you with a soft one. When was the last time you were truly just to someone who couldn't pay you back? OOF. You reach for your barley roll, now slightly crushed under your elbow, and tear it in half. You offer a piece to the hunched old man sitting beside the fountain. He grins without teeth. Socrates, of course, pretends not to notice. The two of you walk on, and you find yourself unusually quiet. You're not sure justice can ever really be solved. It's not a math equation. It's more like a song you have to keep singing, even when you forget the lyrics halfway through. Socrates stops and glances back. Don't aim to be right, he says. Aim to be just. They're not always the same. The streets grow louder, a Ghent carts rolling in, voices rising, a marketplace waking up with the hum of daily dramas. But your head is still in the clouds, maybe in the foundations, digging through philosophical bedrock with your bare hands. You don't have answers, but you have better questions than you did this morning. And in Socrates' book, that's more than enough. The afternoon sun starts to dip, casting longer shadows through the narrow alleys of Athens. You're walking now through quieter parts of the city, past shuttered workshops, sun-baked walls, and the smell of rosemary floating from someone's dinner pot. Socrates is still talking, of course, but this time it's not about justice or politics. It's about the thing that always lurks just beneath his questions, the invisible foundation he builds every argument on. The soul. Now, don't panic. You're not about to be lectured on ghosts or incense or anyone's chakras. For Socrates, the soul isn't a shimmering vapor that floats upward when you die. It's the real you, the driver behind your eyes, the quiet judge in your chest, the part of you that thinks and chooses and remembers, sometimes regrets. He stops at a crumbling bench and sits down, patting the space beside him. If you poison your body, he says, you weaken your limbs. But if you poison your soul, you forget what it means to live. Charming, mainstream fact. Socrates believed the soul was immortal and the core of human identity. This idea shows up most famously in Plato's Phaedo, where Socrates discusses death calmly just before drinking the hemlock. To him, the death of the body wasn't tragic. What was tragic was a life spent corrupting the soul through ignorance, injustice, or shallow living. You ask him what he means by corrupting. He stretches his arms, yawns dramatically, letting your appetites rule you, lying to win, hating what you envy, knowing better and still choosing worse. You wince. That last one hits hard. Quirky tidbit. Socrates didn't claim to be wise, just aware of how unwise he was. That's what made him different. He once said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and that sulker asking the hard questions, owning your contradictions, was more important than money, status, or even safety. Historians still argue whether Socrates' concept of the soul was meant to be theological or purely ethical. Was he talking about an eternal spirit, or just your moral core, the part of you that can grow sick with shame or strong through self-discipline? Either way, it makes for a restless kind of peace. You realize Socrates doesn't just argue with people to win. He argues because every time someone starts thinking harder, he sees it as a kind of soul exercise, like a mental stretch, or philosophical CrossFit no weights, just wildly complex moral dilemmas. He nudges you. Have you noticed how people obsess over their bodies, their clothes, their homes, but forget to train the thing that makes all the choices? Instagram didn't exist yet, you mumble. He laughs, still doesn't. But vanity, that's timeless. You both watch a young man passing by, chest puffed out, toga barely concealing muscles honed by years of dramatic posing. He oils those arms more than he oils his mind, Socrates mutters, and you stifle a giggle. Then, a quieter moment, he looks toward the fading light. If the soul is a garden, he says, most people plant weeds and wonder why the fruit tastes bitter. You think about your own garden. Is it overgrown, abandoned, carefully pruned but secretly hollow? This is how Socrates works, gently tugging at your assumptions until you're not sure where you started. He tells a story, not a real one, probably, but a helpful image. Picture a charioteer guiding two horses, one noble and self-controlled, the other wild and unruly. The charioteer is your reason. The noble horse is your courage, and the wild one, your appetites, your hunger, your anger, your ego. The soul is that ride, he says. The better you guide it, the smoother your journey. But most people, they just let the wild horse drag them through bushes. You want to protest, but then remember a few of your own impulsive bush rides. Texts you shouldn't have sent. Arguments you escalated. Entire tubs of hummus you once demolished alone. No comment. As the sun dips low, the city's energy softens, the noise dims. People head indoors, lamps flicker in windows, and you find yourself strangely calm, like the ideas are beginning to settle in layers, sifting down through your mind like warm sand. Socrates stands again. It's not about never making mistakes, he says. It's about noticing which ones you choose to repeat. You both walk slowly now, your steps sinking in rhythm, past a dog snoozing in the shade of a crumbled wall, past an old woman muttering to her olive tree, past your own reflection in a shop window, tired, thoughtful, and perhaps a little more alive. You ask one last question, your voice softer than before. What if I don't know how to fix my soul? Socrates pauses. He tilts his head. Then you've already begun. Wake the next morning, if you ever really slept. The stone bench wasn't exactly Tempur-Pedic, and Socrates, well, let's just say he talks in his sleep. Something about virtue and vinegar. You're not sure, but now the air is crisp again, and the agora is yawning into motion. And Socrates is already on his feet, stretching like someone who believes bed sores build character. Today, he's got virtue on the brain. Let's say he begins over some breakfast figs. That you want to live, well, not rich, not famous, but well. How do you do it? You choose slowly, suspiciously, get lucky. No, he says, flicking a fig stem. You train your soul, like an athlete, and your event is called virtue. Mainstream fact, Socrates believed virtue wasn't a fixed trait you were born with. It was a kind of knowledge, a skill you could develop. Just as a blacksmith learns how to strike iron, a good person learns how to strike a balance between their instincts and their better judgment. To him, wisdom and virtue were basically the same thing. But, you argue, plenty of smart people do terrible things. He nods. Then they're not wise, they're just clever. And here comes the tricky part. Socrates didn't divide virtues into bite-sized categories like courage, moderation, and piety, at least, not in any rigid way. For him, they were all flavors of the same dish. To be truly just, you needed wisdom. To be truly courageous, you needed self-control. Everything leaned on everything else, like a web of good decisions strung tight across the soul. Fringe tidbit. There are old stories suggesting Socrates believed no one willingly does wrong. He thought all evil came from ignorance. If people really understood what was good for them, not just in the moment, but deeply, long-term, they'd choose rightly. So every sin was, in a way, a philosophical miscalculation. That single quote's art, comforting and terrifying. You pause to think about your own bad choices. That time you lied to get out of trouble. That friendship you let rot. That opportunity you ignored because anxiety whispered, don't try. Were those moral failings, or just math errors in your soul? Historians still argue whether Socrates was being idealistic here. Some think he genuinely believed that better thinking leads to better living. Others think he was being pushed people toward examining themselves more honestly. Socrates gestures toward a potter across the square, shaping clay with confident stained hands. You see that? He asks. She wasn't born knowing how to mold anything, but she practiced every day. Why should the soul be any different? You look down at your hands. They're not shaping anything. Not really, he continues. Most people spend their lives reacting, chasing comfort, avoiding shame. But if you stop and ask what's actually good, what actually leads to peace, to inner strength, that's when you begin the real work. You nod slowly. So, virtue is like brushing your teeth. Except for your conscience, he grins. Exactly. And most people forget to floss their humility. You walk again, this time toward the hills. The city falls behind. Birds chatter in the fig trees. It's quieter here, more space for the soul to stretch out. And that's when Socrates drops a line that lodges itself deep in your ribs. Tell me, he says, are you living in alignment with what you know to be true? You stop walking, are you? You think of all the things you say you believe about kindness, honesty, balance, and then all the things you actually do, the small betrayals, the lazy excuses, the endless negotiation between what's easy and what's right. It's a bit much for 9 a.m. You sit down on a rock. Socrates doesn't press. He knows the question's doing its work already. That's how he functions, dropping bombs, wrapped in compliments, and watching you implode politely. He picks a fig and tosses it your way. You don't have to get it all right today, just better than yesterday, and more honest than last week. You sigh. But what if I fail again? Oh, you will, he says. The point isn't to be perfect. It's to be aware. Failures. Just another way the soul grows. There's a breeze now, warm and kind. You breathe it in. Virtue, as Socrates sees it, isn't some list of rules to follow. It's not gold stars or checklists or divine commandments etched into stone. It's a process, a loop, a lifetime of tuning your inner compass again and again. Even when the needle's gone wobbly and the forest is thick, the two of you sit. For a while, eating quietly. No more speeches, no more riddles, just fig juice on your fingertips and a sliver of peace growing between your ribs. For once, you don't feel like arguing. You're back in the agora by midday, where the sun makes the marble look like it's glowing from the inside out. Kids run past in a blur of dust and laughter, and vendors yell half-heartedly about olives and wine like they're just going through the motions. Socrates is already deep in another debate. You're not surprised. It's with a young man who looks too polished, too confident, probably fresh from a lecture hall and full of half-baked certainty. He's trying to win. Socrates is trying to untangle. Today's topic, knowledge, what it is, how you get it, and whether you actually have any. Fun, mainstream fact, Socrates famously claimed to know nothing, or more precisely, to know that he knew nothing. That sounds humble, almost too humble, but it was the foundation of everything he did. The oracle at Delphi once called him the wisest man in Athens, and rather than throwing a toga party, Socrates spent the rest of his life proving that wisdom begins with recognizing your own ignorance. You can't fill a cup that's already full, he tells the young man, especially when it's full of warm nonsense. You choke on a date. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe Socrates wasn't against knowledge, just suspicious of how quickly people claimed to possess it. He didn't write anything down. Ever so everything we know comes from others like Plato and Xenophon. That means we're always guessing which ideas were truly his, and which were dramatized for philosophical fan fiction. The young man insists that knowledge is simple, just true beliefs. Confirmed by reason, Socrates smiles. So, if I believe my neighbor is trustworthy because he looks like someone who wouldn't steal my goat, and he doesn't steal it, that's knowledge. The man frowns. Well, no, that's luck. Exactly, Socrates says, clapping. Belief and truth aren't enough. You need understanding, a reason you can defend without sounding like a goat yourself. Historians still argue whether Socrates had a full theory of knowledge at all, or if he just enjoyed poking holes in everyone else's definitions. Some say he was preparing the soil for Plato's later system. Others think he genuinely believed knowledge was always provisional, always slippery. You get dragged into the conversation, of course. Tell me, Socrates asks you, what do you know for certain? You freeze. Your name, maybe, but even that wobbles when you think about how identities shift. Your birthday, only because someone told you. Your memories. You've misremembered things before. Ask any sibling with a long grudge. You mutter something about gravity. Socrates shrugs. You believe in gravity, but do you understand why it exists? I watched a documentary once. He laughs. And it's not cruel, just delighted. Then he says something unexpected. The goal isn't to know everything. It's to stay curious enough that you keep asking the right questions. That lands. You realize Socrates isn't interested in trivia or textbook facts. His kind of knowledge isn't about memorization. It's about how your beliefs fit together, whether they're sturdy or full of emotional chewing gum. It's about examining your life, not just living it on autopilot. You watch as the young man finally concedes, not because he's been humiliated, but because he's seen a crack in his own certainty, and he's intrigued. That's what Socrates does. He plants doubt like it's a seed, and that little sprout of doubt, that's the beginning of knowledge. Afterward, Socrates takes a slow stroll with you through a quiet colonnade. The wind tugs gently at his himation. You pass a woman teaching her child to read by tracing letters in the dirt. You both stop to watch. That, he says, is learning. You squint, but she's just showing him symbols. Exactly, no one's born knowing letters, or justice, or how not to ruin your friendships. We learn. And the moment you think you're done learning, that's when you become the fool. You sigh, so I should just accept that I know nothing and walk around second-guessing everything for the rest of my life. Socrates tilts his head. No, you should walk around asking better questions. You think about your own questions lately. The ones you don't ask because they might shake things up. The ones you pretend you already answered, because it's easier than uncertainty. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Who told me what success looks like? What beliefs am I clinging to that no longer serve me? Maybe the Socratic method isn't just about winning debates. Maybe it's a flashlight for your soul, a way to peek into corners you've ignored. Ever get tired of always questioning everything? You ask him, he shrugs. Only when I'm around people who don't. The two of you keep walking. The colonnade opens up into a courtyard where students are lounging, chatting, arguing. Life pulses on and you feel just a little taller, like you've earned the right to keep asking, to keep not knowing, and to know that's okay. Afternoon slides lazily over Athens like honey on a warm tile. The city glows with that late-day bronze sunlight puddling on statues and softening every hard edge, even the ones in your own chest. You and Socrates wander through the narrow back lanes now, less agora, more neighborhood. Laundry sways like tired flags above your heads. There's a goat chewing on a sandal that definitely doesn't belong to it. But Socrates isn't distracted. Not by laundry, not by goats, not by sandals, because today, well, this moment is about love. Mainstream fact. Socrates viewed love not as mere emotion, but as a powerful philosophical force. In Plato's Symposium, a dialogue where several men drunkenly ramble about the meaning of love, Socrates delivers a version that doesn't flirt or flatter. He says true love is a longing for beauty, not just physical beauty, but the eternal, unchanging beauty of truth and goodness itself. Basically, Socrates would never write you a love poem. He'd just ask if your soul was improving. You pass by two teenagers giggling behind a clay wall. One blushes and runs. Socrates barely glances. They're still on the first rung, he murmurs. You squint. Of what? The ladder, he replies. The ladder of love. Fringe tidbit. This ladder sometimes called the diatema ladder, after the mysterious priestess Socrates credits with teaching him about lovers like a spiritual staircase. First, you love one body. Then you realize, hey, many bodies are beautiful. Then you admire beautiful minds. Then ideas. Then laws. Then knowledge itself. And finally, if you keep climbing, you fall in love with beauty in its purest, eternal, divine form, so no pressure or anything. You wonder what step you're on. Somewhere between likes, good hugs, and once read a poem and cried. Probably, historians still argue whether this version of love was Socrates' true belief or a Platonic embellishment. Some suggest Socrates was more pragmatic, even ironic, about love in his daily life. Others think he was deadly serious, that to him every romantic feeling was just the training wheels of the soul's higher longing. You ask him, cautiously, so is falling in love with a person just a mistake? He shakes his head. It's a start. That's strangely comforting. Like the idea that your high school heartbreak was part of a grand cosmic syllabus. You walk past a wedding procession, now flute players, flower garlands, everyone slightly tipsy. Socrates watches with a half smile. Marriage is a kind of school, he says, except the tests come before the lessons. You laugh a little too hard, then he says something quieter, almost to himself. Love teaches us how small we are, and how big we might become. You pause. You'd never thought of love as a ladder before, more like a merry-go-round or a hamster wheel. But now you're wondering, have you been climbing? Have your crushes, heartbreaks, obsessions, and quiet moments with people who made you feel seen, were they helping you reach something higher? Or were you just stuck on the first rung, mistaking attraction for destiny? Socrates seems to sense your gears turning. The body is only the hook, he says. The soul is the fish. You raise an eyebrow. That's either very deep or vaguely threatening. He shrugs. Both can be true. As the sun dips lower, the two of you reach a gardener, public one, dotted with benches and laced with time. A few old men are playing a slow game of something that might be chess or might be just rock moving. The kind of place where people talk less and feel more. Socrates sits. You sit beside him. No more talking for now. Just the warm quiet of fading light and a breeze that smells like crushed mint. And somewhere in your ribs, something stirs a weird, quiet hope that maybe all the stumbles and misfires of your emotional life weren't wasted. That maybe loving people, even imperfectly, was practice for loving the world more clearly. You watch a bird pecking at seeds. You think about every person who's ever made your heart ache, and for once you don't feel embarrassed about it. You just feel human and oddly okay with it. Love, it seems, isn't the enemy of reason. It's the flashlight that shows you what your reason's been afraid to admit. And up above, somewhere way past the stars, Socrates' ladder vanishes into the dark, still waiting for your next step. The stars are just beginning to peek through the indigo sky as you and Socrates rise from the bench. Athens, too, is winding down. The busy rhythm of day turns drowsy pots, stacked, doors bolted, fig sellers counting coins. You feel the tug of tired feet, but Socrates seems to gather momentum in the silence, as if his thoughts hum louder when the world grows softer. Come, he says, let's talk about the worst idea in the world. that wakes you up. He's talking about democracy. Mainstream. Fact: Athens was the cradle of democracy. Citizens free, male, landowning, could vote on laws, judge trials, and even exile people through public ballots. The system was radical for its time, and it's often hailed as the philosophical ancestor of modern republics. But here's the twist: Socrates didn't trust it. He wasn't against equality or participation per se. He just questioned whether the average citizen was equipped to make life-and-death decisions about justice, war, and governance. You wouldn't ask your dentist to build a boat, he argued, so why ask your neighbor to legislate morality? You reach a public wall covered with scratched names and crude symbols, votes, cast in clay and stone. Socrates stops, gestures. This is where we voted to kill people, he says plainly, and then went home for lunch. Fringe tidbit: Socrates was openly critical of Athenian democracy, especially after it sentenced him to death in 399 BCE. Some scholars believe his trial was less about corrupting the youth, and more about being an inconvenient reminder of the city's recent failures, like the disastrous Peloponnesian War and the rise of demagogues who turned democracy into theater. Historians still argue whether Socrates was fundamentally anti-democratic or just anti-unthinking democracy. Some interpret him as a frustrated elitist. Others see him as warning against mob mentality, not participation itself. You lean against the wall. But isn't democracy better than tyranny? Socrates nods, slowly. Yes, but better doesn't mean good. Democracy without wisdom is just a popularity contest for power. He picks up a stone and tosses it into the dark. It clinks uselessly against a broken pillar. Imagine, he continues, a ship with no trained captain. The crew decides everything by vote. Where to sail, when to dock, which stars to follow. But none of them understand navigation. That's democracy without philosophy. You picture the boat, you picture it crashing, you feel slightly seasick. And what about voting, you ask? Shouldn't everyone's voice count? Voices should count, he replies. But wisdom should weigh more than noise. You walk in silence for a bit. That one sits heavy. Eventually Socrates grins, sensing your discomfort. Don't worry, the point isn't to ban voting. The point is to raise voters who think before they shout. You pass a public square where a man is preaching loudly about military pride, freedom, and the need to purify Athens. Socrates just mutters, another chef who's never tasted his own stew. It's not that he hated leaders. He hated actors pretending to be leaders. And Athens, like many places, adored a good performance more than it cared for a quiet, thoughtful truth. You ask the thing you've been wondering, so what's the alternative? He doesn't flinch. Philosopher kings, you snort, like a book club took over the government. He laughs, perhaps. But tell me, would you rather be ruled by someone who loves truth, or someone who loves applause? That hits. You remember elections where slogans mattered more than sense. Decisions made by trend, not truth. Maybe Socrates wasn't rejecting democracy. Maybe he was trying to upgrade it, slow it down, sober it up. He kicks at a stone and adds softly, wisdom is slow, but foolishness is fast. That's why we fall for it. You reach a quiet rooftop. The city stretches below flickering oil lamps, soft laughter, the distant whistle of someone terribly off-key. It's peaceful, but fragile. Would you vote for me? You joke, Socrates' eyes you sideways. Only if you promise to make your Own ideas uncomfortable. Is that a campaign slogan? More of a warning. You both laugh, and then grow quiet again, watching Athens blink like an organism a-living. Thinking city that so often forgets to think. You realize Socrates never saw politics as separate from daily life. To him, every conversation was political. Every decision, every refusal to decide, every silence, the way you spent money, treated servants, answered questions, that was your platform. No need for marble halls or election banners. Just talk honestly. Question loudly. Refuse to lie to yourself just because it's easier. And maybe, just maybe, democracy could survive that. Back in the heart of the city now, but it feels different. Quieter, dimmer. The streets wear sleep like a shawl. You follow Socrates through alleys that once smelled like roasted lamb and spilled wine, now cooled to clay dust and chimney. Soot. You pass a cat balancing expertly along a balcony's edge. Somewhere a dog sighs, and Socrates begins to speak again, not about death or love or politics this time, but about the self, the messy, shifty, hard to pin down thing that is you. Mainstream fact: Socrates is famously associated with the phrase, "Know thyself." Carved into the stone at Delphi, it was a maxim he made foundational. Not conquer lands, or get rich, or seek pleasure. No, just know yourself. Understand what you are, and perhaps more importantly, what you're not. You pause under an old fig tree, and Socrates sits at its gnarled base. He doesn't look at you when he speaks. You want to fix the world, he says, but you still lie to yourself about who you are. OOF. Fringe tidbit. There are accounts that Socrates would stop in the middle of the street and fall into long, motionless, transistorious thinking. Once, during a military campaign, he stood still for an entire day and night, completely absorbed in thought. The man could pause harder than most people could run. And what was he thinking about in those marathon mental sessions? Likely not battle strategy. Most believe he was questioning himself, turning inward, prodding at the parts of his psyche others kept hidden under pride or convenience. Historians still argue whether Socrates' obsession with the self was spiritual, therapeutic, or just eccentric. Some claim it was proto-psychology. Others see it as a kind of mystical self-surgery, a ritual of unmasking. You sit beside him. Okay, you say, but how do I know myself? He smiles, tilts his head. Start with what you pretend not to know. You blink. You know which friends drain you, which habits rot you, which lies you tell to stay liked. But you say you don't know, because to know would require change. And change, he chuckles, is terrifying. You don't reply. He's not wrong. You think about your phone habits, your secret comparisons, the way you rehearse apologies you'll never deliver. The anger you tell yourself is just stress. The fear of being dull or forgotten or unremarkable. Knowing yourself, he says, is not about naming your favorite color. It's about witnessing your contradictions without flinching. You sigh. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's the only work that matters. He points to the fig tree. This tree knows what it is. It doesn't try to be a goat. You mutter, "Wish I were a tree." You are, he says. You just forgot how to be rooted. You rest your head against the bark. For a moment, you try to be quiet inside. No narratives, no edits, just honest presence. It lasts 6 seconds before your brain tosses up a weird memory about that time you called your teacher mum in 9th grade. But hey, It's a start. You're not your job, Socrates says. Not your reputation, not your thoughts, not your impulses. Then what am I? Whatever's left when you've told yourself the truth. That one hangs in the air like mist. You realize Socrates isn't trying to make you smarter. He's trying to make you clearer, not more knowledgeable, more real. Like rinsing a window until the light gets in. Most people, he says, build lives on guesses about who they are, and then wonder why their houses feel haunted. You sit in silence for a long time after that dot. Eventually, Socrates stands, dusts off his robe, and looks at you not as a mentor looks at a pupil, but as someone looks into a mirror that just blinked. I think, he says gently, you're not afraid of knowing yourself. You're afraid of what you'll lose when you do. You don't reply, but he knows you heard. You both walk again, slowly now, not because you're tired, but because you feel heavier, in the best way, like your soul is made of stone but warm, shaped, and finally aware it's sitting still for the first time in years. And somewhere inside that stone, a crack, just wide enough for a fig tree to grow. The sky over Athens is now velvet deep, moonless, and stitched with ancient constellations. You and Socrates leave behind the fig tree, its shadow stretching like a memory across the stone. There's no destination now, just motion, just breath, just the soft scuff of sandals on dust. Almost home, Socrates says, not meaning a house. He's quieter now, and you feel it too, that tapering of thought near the end of a long, curious day. But there's one more idea to unpack, one last strange and beautiful paradox before sleep. Mainstream fact: when Socrates was condemned to death, he accepted the verdict calmly, even cheerfully. In Plato's Phaedo, his final hours are recorded not in fear or protest, but in peaceful conversation about the soul's immortality. Surrounded by friends, he drinks hemlock, speaks gently, and dies without panic, as if death were just another long walk toward another question. You stop beneath a cracked archway. Socrates leans on the stones like an old friend would lean on. A gate, death, he murmurs, is either a dreamless sleep or a chance to ask better questions. Fringe tidbit: some sources say that after drinking the poison, Socrates cheerfully described the sensation creeping up his legs. He joked about sacrificing a rooster to Asclepius, the god of healing. Scholars still debate what that meant. Was it irony? Was it gratitude? Was death, to Socrates, a kind of cure? Historians still argue whether Socrates believed in literal immortality, or used it as a poetic tool. Some say he meant the soul survived. Others argue he just wanted to make peace with uncertainty. That, in the absence of knowledge, courage was the next best thing. You sit on a worn slab of marble as he speaks. Why fear death, he says, when we don't even understand life? You want to believe him, truly, but you also want to ask, weren't you scared at all? He turns to you. Of course I was scared, but I was more afraid of dying stupid. You blink, dying without examining, he clarifies, without changing, without trying to understand what it means to be good. That hits you somewhere hard and quiet. He continues, most people don't live, they rehearse living. They chase things they don't want because they're afraid to sit still long enough to want something real. You think about your own life, about the playlists, the goals, the scrolling, the rushing, the laughter that felt more like performance, the self-help books you skimmed at 1.25x speed, and how rare it's been to just sit and ask, what is this all for? Is there a right way to live? You ask, he shrugs. There's no script, just attention. If you pay attention long enough, life becomes philosophy, and philosophy becomes freedom. The wind picks up. Dry leaves flutter across the stone like whispered footnotes. You stand again, following Socrates as he walks toward ridge where the city lights blur like candles behind stained glass. He stops, turns. This is it, he says. The part where you go on without me. You glance around. Where will you go? He smiles. To where all questions end down, begin again. You want to say something wise, something worthy, but all that comes out is thanks, and he nods, thank you, for being brave enough to listen. Then he vanishes into the night, just folds into the shadow like a breath held too long, and you're alone again, but not the same kind of alone, because now you carry something. Not answers, no, Socrates would hate that. You carry curiosity, the kind that itches behind your thoughts, the kind that asks, gently but persistently, is this true? Is this kind? Is this really me? And maybe that's the point. Socrates didn't give you peace. He gave you the tools to shape your own. Now comes the gentle descent into rest. Let the questions settle like dust on a windowsill. Let the images fade. Fig trees, cracked columns, warm laughter echoing in marble courts. Let your breathing slow. Let the mind unfurl. You've walked far tonight, not through space, but through soul. From the agora to the edge of existence itself. And if you feel just a little more human, more flawed, more curious, more whole, then Socrates has done his job. The streets of ancient Athens fade behind your eyes now, softening into a haze of fig-scented breeze and pale lantern light. The sandals are off. The noise has quieted. Even Socrates, with all his endless questions, has finally fallen silent. There's no need to solve anything tonight. Let the echo of thought slow to a lullaby. Let your heart stop sprinting after clarity. Just lie back, imagine the cool marble beneath you, a sky of impossible depth above, and a breeze that hums with the kind of quiet only philosophy knows. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know all the answers. Socrates didn't. Either he simply refused to stop asking what makes a good life, what makes a true self, what makes love or courage or justice real. And maybe, in your own sleepy way, you're beginning to ask too. Let your breath drift in and out. No pressure, no urgency, just that soft rhythm, like waves brushing the edge of some ancient harbor. And above you, the stars blink their slow, eternal questions. Sleep now, not because all is solved, but because all is still open. The world will wait. Your dreams, if they come, might look like fig trees and firelit courtyards. You may find Socrates there, again leaning on a pillar, ready with a riddle, smiling as you approach. But for now, it's enough to simply rest. Good night, thinker. Good night, question asker. Good night, soul.